All right. So, you know that feeling when you're like trying to get up to speed on something that everyone's talking about and you're
Mhm.
like, okay, Denmark, the Arctic, but like, who has the time?
Right.
That's what we're here for. So today we are diving deep on Denmark's role in the Arctic Council. We've got this fascinating article from iCulture by Bastian Freiborg. It's called Understanding the Role of Denmark in the Arctic Council. And trust me, Denmark's role is a lot more than just like Higgs vibes.
Yeah.
So you might be wondering, like, why should I even care about this council way up north? Here's the thing. What happens in the Arctic, it doesn't stay in the Arctic. Melting ice resource competition, this affects all of us.
Yeah, it's becoming increasingly important the world stage, and Denmark is, largely because of Greenland, finds itself in a surprisingly influential position.
Exactly. Let's talk about that. The article really paints Denmark as this advocate for environmental protection and sustainable development, which seems like a pretty big deal for a region that's facing some intense environmental challenges.
Yeah, it really is a big deal. The Arctic is warming at twice the rate of the rest of the planet. So Denmark pushing for responsible resource management and environmental protection within the Arctic Council. That's really, really vital.
And it's not just about the environment, right? The article also highlights Denmark's commitment to making sure that indigenous communities have a voice.
Absolutely. They've been really proactive about promoting indigenous rights and self-determination in the Arctic Council. Like, for example, they've supported initiatives to give indigenous groups more decision-making power over things like resource extraction and land use.
Interesting. So they're not just showing up and saying, hey, we're here to protect the Arctic. They're really trying to amplify the voices of the people who actually live there,
Yeah.
which makes sense.
It's about recognizing that those sustainable solutions in the Arctic, they have to respect and incorporate traditional ecological knowledge and the rights of the people who live there. It's not just an ethical thing. It's crucial for making solutions that will actually work long term.
So we've got Denmark championing environmental protection and indigenous rights. But the article also mentions something about their scientific contributions.
Right. They're not all talk. Denmark has some really impressive scientific institutions that are doing really crucial research in the Arctic, like take the Danish Meteorological Institute. They've been collecting data on Arctic climate change for decades. And what they're finding is directly informing the Arctic Council's policies.
So they're bringing hard data to the table, which in like the world of diplomacy must carry some serious weight.
For sure. That research is giving them a lot of credibility and influence within the council. They're not just making claims about climate change or the need for environmental protection. They've got solid scientific evidence to back it up.
That's a powerful combination, advocating for these important issues and having that research.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, how does that actually translate into influence? I mean, the Arctic Council is made up of some pretty big players.
Right. Right. And that's what makes it really interesting. You've got countries like Russia, the U.S., Canada. They've all got their own interests there. Denmark's strategy, it seems to be less about like throwing their weight around and more about building consensus, finding common ground, working through all those like complex diplomatic channels.
More like a chess game than a poker game.
Yeah, exactly. Strategic alliances, careful negotiation, really understanding where everybody's coming from. And that's where that focus on scientific research is really useful.
Because it gives them neutral ground.
Exactly. Data can be a really powerful tool for diplomacy. It lets Denmark say, look, this is what's happening. It's less about politics and more about how do we actually solve this problem.
Makes you wonder, though, how do you balance protecting the environment with the reality of, like, the economy?
Yeah,
Because the Arctic has resources, right? Oil, gas, minerals.
absolutely. That's a huge tension playing out at the Arctic Council. The article talks about Denmark's support for sustainable development, basically trying to find ways to use those resources without destroying the environment.
Sounds good, but is it really possible? How do you actually do that?
It's definitely a work in progress. But Denmark has been advocating for things like renewable energy in the Arctic, like wind and hydropower. And they've been pushing for responsible tourism, ways for people to experience the Arctic without hurting the environment.
Creating economic opportunities that don't hurt the environment.
Exactly. And they're actually putting some of these ideas into practice. Like Denmark's been investing a lot in renewable energy in Greenland. So they rely less on fossil fuels, and they're setting an example for other Arctic nations.
Trying to lead by example.
Right, showing that you can have economic development and still be environmentally responsible.
But can they convince other countries to follow along? Especially countries with maybe bigger ambitions for what they want to get out of the Arctic.
That's the question, isn't it? It's a balancing act for sure. On one hand, you've got potential economic benefits from those resources. But on the other hand, You could end up with a real environmental disaster if you're not careful.
It's a tough thing to balance. And speaking of tough balancing acts, the article mentions some challenges Denmark's facing, like just in terms of keeping their influence in the Arctic Council. Things are moving so fast up there, and there's more and more pressure to just grab those resources while you can.
Yeah, and Denmark's in a tough spot. They want to use their influence to encourage everyone to think long term, but they're also dealing with countries that might just want to make a quick buck.
A real clash of priorities.
Exactly. And
That's
it's not just about the economics. You've got security concerns, geopolitical maneuvering. The Arctic is becoming more militarized, which just makes everything more complicated.
So Denmark's almost like a mediator, trying to find some kind of common ground, keep everyone's eyes on the bigger picture.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. They're trying to get people talking and working together in a place where it's getting easier and easier to just start competing and fighting.
Which takes us back to those scientific contributions. Seems like that whole data-driven approach, it could be really important for navigating those diplomatic waters.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When you can show the data on climate change or the ice caps melting or what resource extraction is really doing, it's harder for countries to just ignore the environmental side of things.
Yeah, take the emotion out of it.
Right.
Let's see what the science is actually telling us.
Exactly.
So where does that leave us? We've covered a lot. Denmark's stance on environmental protection, indigenous rights, sustainable development, their scientific work, the way they're approaching diplomacy. They're playing a much bigger role in the Arctic than a lot of people realize.
Yeah, and it's only going to get bigger.
Yeah.
As the Arctic changes and the rest of the world starts paying more attention, how Denmark handles all this, it could be more important than ever.
It really makes you think, what happens up there affects everyone.
Definitely.
And the path Denmark's taking, it could have a real ripple effect around the world.
It's a fascinating look at how international relations work. How do we protect the environment? How do we balance the economy with ecology?
For sure. And on that note, listeners, we'll leave you with this thought. Keep your eye on Denmark. This small nation is making some big moves up in the Arctic, and what they do today could have a real lasting impact on the planet. This has been your deep dive into Denmark's influence in the Arctic. We'll be back next time with another fascinating topic. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deeper.